Let me introduce you to Scott Irwin, the Director of Community Development. Scott and his team are doing some remarkable work in helping the homeless become housed and exit homelessness. And I'm going to let Scott introduce Loretta and Joy as well. Thank you for being with us, Scott.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Good to be here this evening. How is everyone? Good. Let me get settled here for a moment. We'll try it that way. As Dr. Robinson said, I'm Scott Irwin, and I have the honor of managing community development for the city of Huntsville. So one of our responsibilities is to administer federal funding and local funding that can serve the unsheltered, the unhoused, or the homeless population within our community. As Huntsville has grown, that population has also grown. So our responsibility is to try to figure out, what has led to individuals who are unsheltered. How do we get them along a continuum toward, self-sufficiency, permanent housing, and ultimately independent living. So that's what we think about and do each and every day through the continuum of care, which I'll talk about in a second. But one thing that we ask initially is, so what are the factors that have led to someone being unsheltered, unhoused? That.
Oh, it's right here on this right here.
Yeah.
Technology straight when it works.
Should I try again, or just? So I'll let you work on trying to bring that forward. So paper never fails us. So some of the factors that lead to someone experiencing homelessness are obviously addiction, domestic violence issues, mental illness, someone who has experienced a job loss or unemployment, foreclosure or the lack of affordable housing, someone who has had a post-traumatic stress event in their life, teens in crisis. Many are fleeing, an unwelcome home due to some lifestyle choices, but teens fleeing a dangerous home life situation is certainly a cause. Relational brokenness, grief, and then despair. So a lot of those issues lead to someone somewhat giving up in life, and if they've given up, then sometimes they can't manage the employment situation, the stability, and they find themselves literally on the streets. What our goal is within Huntsville through community development is homeless encampments are no longer necessary, available, or enabled. We want everyone who is in our community to have the opportunity for shelter, and that's where we focus each and every day. We believe that addiction recovery programs should be available, accessible, and utilized by the homeless. As I said earlier, addiction is a cause that leads to homelessness, so treatment for individuals readily available and then ready to accept that treatment is very important. Mental health treatment and inpatient programs are also equally important. Someone experiencing a mental health crisis, again, we need the resources through Wellstone and other opportunities, and the individuals willing to accept that. Case management and collaboration among our homeless service providers with increased and improved standardized case management. So what's important is we support through our continuum of care about 33 agencies that are focused each and every day on communicating with each other on behalf of the unsheltered population, and that's what's key to any community is that support network is continuing to be focused and continuing to communicate with each other. Economic prosperity and a living wage, so everyone needs to have the opportunity to go to work each and every day and afford their rent. And then finally, the supply of affordable housing and adequate living opportunities for all. We have built a lot of units in the community. Our department focuses on subsidized housing, affordable housing. We've done about 500 units in the last few years. We have more planned. These units are basically driven by a subsidy, and then they are rent restricted, and individuals who live there can't exceed certain limits. Those are low-income housing tax credits. Don't confuse that with Section 8. These are other programs that are out there that if you make less than 60% of the area median income, it could be a senior, it could be a family, then you have a rent that is subsidized so you can afford it. Okay. So our vision is to make homelessness in Huntsville rare, brief, and non-recurring. So how do we do that? So we look at some models around the country. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development gives a lot of our funding, so they have a coordinated entry process. So that matches individuals with the most appropriate housing and services, including rapid rehousing, supportive housing, and other housing interventions. So Loretta Moore, who I'll introduce in a minute, she actually chairs that locally, the coordinated entry process. A crisis response system, which connects those in the shelters, emergency shelters, to street outreach, HPD, and community development, so we can quickly connect services to those that are in need through the coordinated entry process. We use data-driven approach to prioritize the housing assistance. There's, they call it a by name list, that all your circumstances are evaluated and you're prioritized to receive assistance based on that list and that data. Housing availability known, so providers and owners who accept referrals. So we're looking at something like a housing navigator. Again, we're in a tight market right now. So within that tight market, we need to know which landlords have available units. We have to have someone working on behalf of the unsheltered population who has the resources through certain programs. We have to find landlords willing to accept that. And then finally, collaboration. I've said it many times and I'll continue to say it. Collaboration among our social service providers is the backbone of any community. It's the backbone of our community, is to make sure that that strong backbone is in place, that someone who's unsheltered has a safety net to go to. One of our responsibilities, and I'm asked quite often, well, how many do we have in Huntsville that are unsheltered? What's our census, our population? We do an annual point-in-time count. That's the name by HUD. It was done, this data is January of 22. We just completed the 23 count last Wednesday. We don't have all the data in. I would expect some increases, but what we have now is 536, about the last count, total as unsheltered and sheltered. Unsheltered will be 231. Those will be numbers that we identified at a certain point in time last February, that we identified through literally going to the camps and counting individually. And then the sheltered number are those that are living in a shelter through crisis services or Rye Rose or New Future, some of those. And then down below, we also have to do a housing inventory. So we know how many emergency shelter beds we have. We know what transitional beds we have, permanent supported, and then rapid rehousing. So about 925 beds are available in our community right now. We do have about 100 units available at any given night on an emergency shelter. We have two organizations, the Downtown Rescue Mission and the Salvation Army, which on any given night usually have the opportunity for someone who is in need of shelter that can go and seek what they want. There could be circumstances they may have violated the laws and may not be eligible due to their background, but for the most part, we do have those units available. So what's our investment? What have we done in Huntsville in the last several years? So grant years 21 and 22, the City of Huntsville, through Mayor Battle, council members, we have provided over $13 million in grant to 14 separate organizations to serve the homeless population. So what did these funds do? They went to street outreach, again, going into the camps, knowing where the camps are, and working to serve those in the camps. Emergency shelters, someone who needs somewhere to go at night in an emergency situation. Prevention, rapid rehousing, and then a database. So, what's really important, I said we're data-driven. What's data-driven is that we know exactly where someone has spent the night and what kind of resources have been available, so we can continue to monitor those resources and make sure that if they fall through the cracks, then we can pick those up. In December of this last year, just last month, the City of Huntsville funded a new program with the formerly Catholic Center of Concern, is now Center of Concern Huntsville. It's called Huntsville Housing Helps. So if you are a family, an individual that is in a crisis situation with your housing, you can go to the HuntsvilleHousingHelps.com website and make an application. What's important, this is the help up. This would help individuals become stable. If you've made a $500 payment, but you're still $500 short in your rent, that organization can case manage you, help you with some financial literacy, help pay those issues so you are stably housed going forward. Again, it's not just about giving someone funding at that moment. It's figuring out what their needs are long term. And finally, in 2023, our expectation is that we will create additional affordable housing units. We've got about $12 million through funds that were HUD funds, Treasury funds, and we'll do an RFP for developers to help give us additional units within our community that would go alongside some supportive services for someone in the community. So what's the role of community development? A lot of this we help coordinate and organize, but we're accountable. We're accountable to HUD. They give us a lot of the funding. We're accountable to you, the citizens. We're accountable to the mayor, the city council. We try to make sure we use the funding in the best way possible, but that as a community, we're offering resources and services that bring all of us up. We're accountable to our organizations. We have about 33 organizations, so it's our responsibility to make sure we have funded them and given them the proper resources and technical assistance to go do the mission which they've been created for in this community. We're accountable to the unsheltered. We want to make sure that if someone's unsheltered, again, they have that resource, that place that they can go to. And then documentation. It's what we're expected to do. I need to know what we have done for anyone in this community that's come to us for help. I can document it and prove to those that need to be shown exactly what resources were provided, what the response was, and how we can move forward. Our role is awareness. So it's our responsibility is to know the locations. Where are some of the unsheltered residing nightly if they're not in shelters? If they're in camps, what are the environmental conditions of the camps? Are there controlled substances? Is there violence? Is there sanitation issues? Animals? What are those circumstances? Sometimes they get to the point of just not being suitable for living, in habitation. So it's our responsibility to look at that with HPD as we go forward. We will look at identifying the barriers. So what are the barriers? What are someone's goals? And so what are their next steps in order to leave and exit homelessness to become stably housed? And motivation, what are the motivating factors that can lead someone along, again, I'll use that word continuum, along that line so they can move into something more permanent. And continue the collaboration. So this is where the strength, again, is. So HPD, you see a lot of those individuals here tonight. So HPD is sort of the backbone of what we do also. So if you're in the community now and you see someone that is unsheltered, homeless, that's in distress, and you can't talk to them, you can call HPD. Now, they're not going to go out there and arrest. They're going to go and assess the situation and see what does that person need. They'll call Joy Davis on my staff. They'll go to First Stop. They'll go with whichever organization is available that can see what these needs are. And that's important because there are all these resources, but some are still violating the law and they don't want the resources. So there is certainly a role for HPD to place. So the agencies that we're accountable to, the agencies for the city at large, and property owners. Many times property owners may have some unsheltered individual simply squatting on their land. They're not aware of it. They're creating unhealthy and unsafe conditions. So with property owners, we try to make sure we assist them when available to make sure that their property rights are maintained. The resources, again, availability, accessibility, and we need to understand where the specific needs are and how we allocate the funds. One thing I like to point out is the First Stop, so one of our day shelters in Huntsville, which we are supporting with a physical rehabilitation of their facility, about $2 million, but they house 50 people transitioned from homelessness on the streets to independent living last year, which that's an amazing result, and I applaud them for doing that, but that's just the start. There's still probably 50 more people come into our community in the last year, and we'll continue to do what we do until we hopefully get those numbers down to everyone who needs a house, is ready for housing, can maintain that. Again, the continuum of care. Loretta Moore is a planner within our department, so her responsibility is primarily working with some of these emergency solution grant funds, but also to lead the collaborative efforts of the 33 organizations through coordinated entry meetings, through strategic planning meetings, through bylaw meetings and things like that. Loretta, you want to come forward and just outline a little bit of what the continuum does, because this issue of homelessness is not just about the city, it's about the continuum of care as we help lead. Then after that, Joy Davis on my staff will come forward. Joy goes into the homeless camps weekly, sometimes daily. She has relationships. She's built trust with many of these individuals, so we know exactly what's there, and she'll talk a little bit, just briefly, about what we're doing in that front. Loretta?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's okay. Yeah. A little bit of a height differential. So let's talk a little bit about the continuum of care. The continuum of care process is one that started in the mid-90s from a national perspective from HUD. It was enacted into Congress by the HERTH Act, which is otherwise known as the Homelessness Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act. And by 2009, a number of leaders within our community here in Huntsville brought together to form an organization known by many of you as NATCH, the North Alabama Coalition for the Homeless. And they served as the lead of our local continuum of care until about March of 2001. Once the pandemic hit, our continuum of care, like so many other organizations, halted. There was a lapse in the ability to effectively kind of coordinate services as we tried to figure out how long are we going to navigate this pandemic? What does this mean for many of us? And it really impacted the volunteers that were coming out to assist our unsheltered residents, because the volunteers had to take into consideration the health risks and concerns as well. And it really impacted some of the services that were being provided by those among us with the aging population and whatnot. As the continuum continued to exist but wasn't necessarily convening, the numbers of agencies began to dwindle down to what Scott referred to a few minutes ago as really those that are required by HUD to be part of the continuum of care. That's those that were receiving the ESG funding, Emergency Solutions Grant. ESG is one of the only HUD programs that is specifically earmarked to address homelessness. The specific uses for that program are for street outreach and for shelter operations, case management, and coordination of the data that we receive on our unsheltered as well as those that are experiencing housing instability. For anybody who's unclear of what I'm talking about, we would otherwise refer to that segment of the population of those that are maybe couch surfing. Some may be having the ability to pay for hotel, motel stays for a finite period of time. The cost of hotel, motel typically is exorbitant. For those that are able to work, it is challenging to pay out of pocket for an entire month. And so oftentimes we see individuals, especially those that are on fixed incomes, that maybe have the ability to reserve a hotel and to remain sheltered for the beginning of the first couple weeks of the month, and then after that, it's trying to figure out where are we going to go from here. So our continuum of care had begun to dwindle, and I think we were down to roughly 10 or 11 members. Again, the majority, those that were receiving the Emergency Solutions Grant funding. So community development then said to the continuum, let us step in and kind of help with this to coordinate and pull together the services. So as Scott said, as of the latter part of 2022, before we had our membership drive, we had roughly 33 member agencies, some receiving federal funds, some not. Some with their own nonprofit organization, some individuals, including ones with lived experience that can, or live what HUD refers to as lived expertise. We can assume what members of our unsheltered population want, but if you really want to know what is desired, we've got to go straight to the source. We could assume if we just had a unit to put you in, you could seamlessly transition into that. And there are models that suggest that that is one of the most effective methods, the housing first model. And yet we still see those of us who work alongside of our unsheltered residents, the number of issues and concerns that have to be addressed through intensive case management in order for that to be effective. Otherwise, just like we have residents who call when they begin to see camps form or groups of individuals who are occupying land that could be owned by private entities or by the city or state. We see the same thing when individuals are placed in units. As we talk about some of the successes, these successes are the number of individuals and organizations that have pulled together to say, let's work together to try to create kind of a seamless or a safety net for our unsheltered and unstably housed population. Some of the other successes are the numbers of committees that we have functioning through the continuum of care. When we inherited the continuum in 2001, there was one functioning committee, and that was the Veterans Committee. The Veterans Committee never skipped a beat, and I brag on that constantly. And yet we've got other committees that have come back into fruition to help build the capacity of some of our shelters, to be able to offer training to some of our case managers who are working with our unsheltered population doing street outreach, as well as the ability to have our coordinated entry committee that is doing what is known as case conferencing that hadn't happened previously in our area. During case conferencing, this is where the case managers come together and kind of discuss some of the more challenging and difficult cases to try to come up with some resolutions. Sometimes we need someone else to bounce the idea off of. And what we find is that with case conferencing, oftentimes when we are talking specifically about an individual or a family, they have had multiple points of contact with the different agencies that are present in the room. So what we're doing is eliminating duplication. The ability to have an agency that says, nope, I offered that client a room, and this was the client-imposed barrier that came as a result, and I had to move on to the next client or household or family that was ready to come into shelter. Some of those barriers, I've talked about the successes, I'm pivoting to the challenges now. Some of those challenges, we have individuals who have things like emotional support, animals, and oftentimes that poses a barrier for housing. Not only with apartments, when we can find apartments that will accept subsidies and vouchers, but also in our shelters who just do not have the capacity to house additional household members. That's what we're going to call the emotional support now, okay? We also run into different barriers when we have individuals who do not have the wherewithal. Some of them have been denied denied disability income, and that's where case management comes in, the ability to work with the client, because if you've ever had to apply, then you know that most times you're going to get denied the first time, you're going to have to appeal, that process can be lengthy, and what can we be offering in the meantime? The other thing is to remember that we have a segment of the population that prefers to be, I'm going to use the term off the grid, okay? That kind of prefers, and so when you say, ideally, where would you like to be? Because they have options. Nobody can just tell you, go to Downtown Rescue Mission, they have a bed for you. The client may not want to reside at Downtown Rescue Mission for whatever reason. So the ability to live independently, or to have the feeling of a certain level of independence, to be able to go and come as you please, to not have to surrender your devices, to not have to adhere to certain rules and guidelines, although even those of us that are stably housed, homeowners or renters, we still have rules and guidelines to adhere to. But the notion that oftentimes onlookers take is that nothing is being done, and there are literally members of the population who, for whatever reason, could be mental challenges, are like, leave me alone. And to those, we continue to try to consistently offer services. And to those, we try to continue to make sure that they know that there are some options available. And oftentimes, it's not the ability to say all you have to do is go to Thrive, go to Huntsville Hospital, but it's the ability to work through agencies like First Stop and Downtown Rescue Mission and Wellstone and others who have outreach case managers that are willing to go out into the camps and to coordinate to bring services to them, to bring health professionals to the camp to address everything from wounds to things that might require shots, vaccinations, etc. So there's much that has been accomplished. There are many challenges. One of the greatest challenges is coming up with there's no cookie cutter solution. For each individual and family that we encounter, it's the ability to offer them options and to hear from them what is their preference. And I'll let Joy speak more to that because that's her ministry. She is out there constantly, as Scott said, building rapport with individuals in a manner that hasn't necessarily been initiated by the continuum in the past, but this is where we are. One thing I neglected to mention is that the continuum of care is not just the city of Huntsville. It is Huntsville, Madison County, Morgan County, and Limestone County. And there's the last challenge that I'll bring up. Rural homelessness and urban homelessness can look distinctly different. And so the ability to address the unique needs of individuals throughout a relatively large footprint is one that we are still working towards, daily striving to come up with additional solutions. We're doing some planning for our strategic vision for the next 5 years. As a matter of fact, our next meeting is tomorrow. And we look forward to hearing from you all any additional thoughts or ideas, or we're prepared to entertain some questions as well after I pass the mic.
Let's thank Loretta.
Hi, so I'm Joy Davis. I'm also a planner with community development. I kind of got involved with our unsheltered community last year when we started hosting the warming centers when it got extremely cold, and then when we conducted the point in time count for the COC. At that time, I got more immersed in trying to connect and reach out to our homeless community and see what resources are needed and making sure that people are collaborating. So what I do now on a regular basis, part of my position is to work with our HPD partners, the CROs, our new homeless unit, and all of our agencies that are performing and conducting the direct street outreach to our unsheltered community. I am not a caseworker. I'm not a social worker. I make sure that everyone is aware of that. I'm a planner. By trade or by my position, I manage grants. What I do is I make sure that we're making the connections between what's needed with our unsheltered community and what we have available. What our grant funds provide, who we partner with, our HPD resources, and make sure they're informed of the programs and the funding that we have available. I make sure that when I meet someone who is unsheltered, who has a special circumstance or who needs something very specific, I'll reach out to First Stop, HPD, Wellstone, Ross Recovery, our addiction recovery services, and I make sure that they are connected with the right person. And then I will follow through. Did you go to this appointment? Did you meet this person? And then I'll go back out and, continue to push, continue to encourage, make sure that they are receiving the services that they need. If they have special needs, I have my past, my history and experience. I've worked with intellectually disabled adults very frequently. I have been a foster parent in the past, and so I've, tried to identify what those needs are. For a specific example, just talking to somebody and realizing, the way he's talking or the way he is communicating with me, this might be a need for him. And that individual was actually a foster child from Nevada that we were able to connect back with the services of Clark County and get them back to where they needed to be. It's just asking those right questions. But working with First Stop and all, Wellstone, everyone who goes into the camps and making sure we're communicating, collaborating, and then working with Loretta and how she works with the COC. It's, that's what my role is that liaison position, gave me that title, and making sure that we're all kind of collaborating from what's going on through our meetings and our Zoom calls and how we're interacting via email to what's going on actually, with HPD and First Stop in our camps, what the situations are, what the conditions are, what's needed, talking to our code enforcement personnel that I work very closely with, our property owners, and making sure that we're all being collaborative, but also empathetic and compassionate, and providing the resources and the tools to move someone from a case of or a situation of being unsheltered to pushing them or encouraging them to identify what they want and getting them to that next position, that next goal. So that's what I do. We're working on developing a software where we can better communicate and identify the needs of where people are located and what they want, and being able to implement that throughout agencies. So we're really trying to move to the next level. And Loretta, she really paved kind of the way of what I do, but that's kind of my position and how I work very closely with the unsheltered and gaining their trust and trying to just identify what we need to move forward, while also knowing that we all have to respect the laws and our citizens and our property owners as well, but make sure the resources are provided and are available. And so that's kind of my role in the community. But I'm going to pass it over to Jonathan.
So you've heard the words collaboration and partnership used a lot by the team from community development. That partnership would not be, and these partnerships, by the way, are brand new. Maybe in the past year and a half, there has been a huge change in the way community development is working with the homeless. And HPD is part of that partnership. The way community development works with the homeless has changed tremendously. So I know you've got lots of questions, but hang on to them until you've heard from HPD, because they're going to give you a whole other side of this. The reason they're here, that you all are here tonight, is because HPD has been getting lots of reports of homelessness on South Parkway in particular, and so we wanted you to have some answers and understand what's being done, what the resources are. So it's going to be Chris, or is it going to be Officer Savage? We're going to let Officer Savage, I heard Officer Savage speak about his role in working with homeless as a community resource officer. Does a very great job, and I expect nothing less, but I hope you'll introduce everybody else that's here with you too.
Hey guys, how we doing tonight? Good. Back in the back we have Sergeant Davis. He had raised his hand. That is my old running buddy on the streets, and now he's my boss. Behind him we have Officer Killingsworth, and behind him we have Officer Boyd. They are our new homeless mental health unit, and I'd like to commend Mayor Battle and our chief for instituting this homeless and mental health unit. It is absolutely vital to the way we interact with our unsheltered population and providing them with the resources that they need. Believe it or not, making a physical arrest of a homeless individual is one of the last things that we want to do. Okay? This is not jail is not the solution here. Okay? These individuals are living in crisis. These individuals are dealing with many times several debilitating conditions, whether it be serious mental illness, whether it be substance use. And guys, I know we're in the South, and sometimes we say substance use, they're doing it to themselves. Hey, if you have been abused as a child from the time you were 4, 5, 6 years old on up, you may be looking for any escape avenue that you can get. So compassion, Joy mentioned compassion, and compassion is key with any type of interaction with this community. And compassionate policing is something that is pushed out from the top every single day. Our goal, or our role in this job is pretty simple. I used to think, and Dr. Robinson stated how in the past year things have changed tremendously, and they have. When I started with HPD 10 years ago, we used to get complaints about homelessness, and we thought, well, we just got to go handle it. We don't know what we're doing, but let's go try to do something about it, okay? Let's get rid of this complaint. Now we have available resources. It is so nice that when we get those complaints, we're able to contact Joy. And Joy will drop on a dime to meet us out there. I called her last week or the week before, early in the morning. I texted her at like 7:30. Hey, are you at work yet? And there was an individual that I had run into, and she dropped what she was doing, met me out there, and she tried to get resources for that individual. That's the kind of relationship that we have now. We have other partners like First Stop, and First Stop has been a tremendous asset. You have Jennifer, you have Drew, you have Michael, you have Alondra. They're with us every week going out into the camps. You have Ross, which is Recovery Organizational Support Specialist. You have Partnership for a Drug-Free Community. These individuals will stop what they're doing. I have the ability to call them. Hey, I've got an individual here who is homeless, but he has substance use issues. He's tired, he's scared, he's ready to get some help. They will drop what they're doing, come out to the field, and do an assessment right there and see about getting placement for that individual. Guys, that's something that did not exist 10 years ago. Okay? So that's something that I'm very grateful for, and those are proactive steps that the department is taking. Our role is strictly support. This is not a police problem. It is a community problem. Okay? And this is a problem that is experienced by everybody in this room, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here tonight. And it's going to take a community solution. Ours is just to help support those resource groups that exist any way that we can. So one of the ways that we do that is through crisis management. Everybody that is unsheltered that we run into is in a state of crisis. By a show of hands, anybody ever had any type of insecurity about where they were going to stay? Anybody? I have. Okay. Several years ago when I was in between careers, I was a young dad, I had 3 kids, and guys, I was not unsheltered, but I was couch surfing, and that was very scary. Okay. So these individuals that are unsheltered, they're in a state of crisis. They're scared. So we want to do crisis management. Every mental health officer, every community relations officer is a mental health officer and a crisis intervention officer. So we use those techniques and those skills that are taught to us to help that person come removed from that crisis and be able to make rational, better decisions for themselves. We promote the available resources, and this is a big one. We promote the correct resource, okay? And by that, we want this individual to choose. The definition of someone in crisis is that they're out of control. So if I can give that individual the ability to choose, I'm giving them some form of control. But we want to make sure that that's the right choice. See, I'll interact with people and I'll say, hey, look, we can't be here. They've trespassed you from this property. I had this happen Tuesday or last Friday. There's an individual that was on a piece of property that he had been trespassed from. I said, hey, you cannot be here. He said, well, I'm cleaning up. Well, trespass laws don't work that way. The property owner doesn't want you here. And he goes, we need to call them and you need to mediate for us. I'm like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. That's not a winning solution there. So we want to promote the correct and available resource and solution to these individuals. And then, guys, part of our job, we're law enforcement officers. We enforce existing ordinances. Property owners have rights. And if you went on some of the properties, you saw some of the pictures in Mr. Irwin's presentation there. Guys, that's scratching the surface. Okay? These are some deplorable conditions. A month ago, we met a family out there that came down for a funeral. And they were looking at a piece of property that they owned, and guys, it was just absolutely trashed. And so they're going to have to pay thousands of dollars to have that. We're talking about toxic waste. It is not, it's not litter. It's not garbage. That may be what the code is, but it's absolutely repulsive. Okay, and they're going to have to pay thousands of dollars to have that cleaned up. So we have a duty to protect their rights as well. And lastly, we want to support the implementation of community development's long-range plan. And we can do that by encouraging people, encouraging them to make better choices that will provide shelter, safety, and stability. We want to provide support and guidance to our community stakeholders. I'm up in North Huntsville, okay? I'm one of the North Precinct Community Relations Officers. And we have businesses up there, and I want those businesses to stay up there, okay? I don't want them to leave. They provide a service. Guys, when a daycare calls me and they have a homeless camp on the other side of their fence from their playground, and there are hypodermic needles, and there are people relieving themselves, and they're defecating on the front stoop, okay, guys, we've got to step in and act. That's no quality of life. That's no quality of life for either individual, by the way. So if we're going to be compassionate, let's not think about just creating a place for them to stay without dealing with the issue that caused the homelessness in the first place. That's out of sight, out of mind. That's not real compassion. That's forgetting that someone exists. We don't want to see it. It's uncomfortable, but that's not really helping that individual. If we don't provide and promote the correct resources to actually help this individual reach real stability, whether that be rehab from substance use, whether that be therapy or medication for a serious mental illness, we're not helping that individual. We're merely kicking the can down the road, and we're putting it out of our sight. That's not true compassion. I want to say this. Every individual, I said this in the beginning, but every individual that is homeless is in a state of crisis. It is absolutely naive of us to think that they have the capacity to make the correct choice for themselves in that state. Guys, they're trying to eat. They're living underneath the overpass. I go up there and I'll visit these camps. It is so loud. It's frightening, honestly. And I asked one individual, how do you ever sleep? And this particular individual said, it's actually, the noise actually drowns out the voices that I hear. Okay? That's the reality that these individuals live in. And if we don't take steps to actually get them proper assistance, we're not really doing this job. We're not policing. We're not effectively ministering to these individuals. Okay? And I'm going to say this. If you have a desire to help, that's great. Find an organization like First Stop and give to them. Okay, guys? I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a minute. But when churches go out on Sunday, 5 different churches, and give a full-course hot meal, they can't possibly eat it all. You're encouraging rats. It's actually contributing to the problem, and you're not helping the individuals. This is not about a pat on the back. This is not about a feel-good. This is actually helping individuals. If you want to do that, find an established organization, one that Joy would recommend. Joy goes out every week and gives the resources. Find one of those groups, donate to that, and really help a worthy cause. Okay? Thank you.
We've heard from some experts tonight about some programs that are going on. We probably should mention also the co-responder program. Wellstone has social workers, case managers who respond with HPD as they go out to calls, mental health calls, not just to the homeless camps, but anywhere in the community. And that is a very innovative and very effective program as well that's helping in this case. Huntsville Hospital is now going out and doing actually teledoc visits in the camps too, right?
They'll go out to Rose of Sharon and over with First Stop, yes, to do visits.
So lots of resources out there. You have handouts that share some of these resources too, so take a look at that. We have time for some questions. Yes, sir.
In recent months, there seems to be an increased number. You go into a shopping center and you'll see individuals or families who are well dressed, and they have signs that they're homeless or that they need some type of support. What category do those people, because you really wonder whether they're truly homeless.
And then
What
there's a
category
whole
do they fit in?
story there that I'll bet HPD would like to share with you. There's another microphone around here somewhere. Oh, there it is, okay. So, what's the name of that?
I can't.
Yeah, that's an issue.
You'll have to repeat the question. I was looking for a microphone.
The question about the Romanis and the people at the camps, the families that are in the parking lots at Target, at Publix.
Well, these are well-dressed people.
Yeah,
And they have the signs, let me pay, help me pay for my rent,
Yes,
paying
yes.
playing violin.
Right.
Yeah.
Without going into too much detail, that's a current investigation that we're working with, so I want to speak too specifically on that. I'll tell you a funny anecdotal story about it. When I was a young officer, I ran into a situation like that. Very, very well dressed. They had a little baby out there. Guys, I was dirt poor. I could barely feed my kids, but I felt bad for them. And I took them to Chick-fil-A, and I let them order whatever. And then, boy, they ordered the world in that place. Stuff I wouldn't even order. And then they went out and got in a brand new minivan and drove off, and I was so mad. I could have tore up an anvil. I was so mad that night. But you know, that is a current issue that we're facing. Sergeant Davis ran into a situation 2 or 3 months ago, and it took hours to identify the individual. But that's a current investigation that we're working on. Can't really speak to it right now.
But it's safe to say that anybody that's in those parking lots asking for money, it's a scam.
Absolutely, it's a scam, and you should call the police anytime you see that. Okay, as many contacts as we can have, the better that's going to be.
Don't give them money.
Do not.
Another question. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the conditions of the camps, and as someone who does go out and work with the community, we've been asking the city for quite some time to provide basic things like water and porta potties and trash receptacles, because the facts are, there's not enough affordable housing for people to be transitioned into. So a lot of these camps are on city property, and it is unfair to demonize them for not being able to keep up certain lots of land when they don't have the resources to do so. So while we're working towards affordable housing, can we allow them to have access to the resources they need to actually be good stewards of the land that they're on? A lot of folks would like to, but don't have the means to keep themselves clean or their property clean.
So that goes to a basic fundamental question: do you want to make it convenient and sustainable for them to stay in the conditions in which they are within a camp? So our philosophy, our directive is that we don't believe anyone should be living in camps. We want to make sure we have the available resources through either a congregate shelter, an emergency shelter, to move someone into that. Each and every night we have bed space available, and we would encourage anyone who is experiencing being unsheltered or housing crisis that they go to that avenue, but to make them in comfortable situations inside a camp, that's not a direction we want to take. There are other, like shower up, there are other things that will allow them to get clean and safe without actually going into the camp to make those long-term options for them to remain in.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Just a follow-on question really quick, if you will, Scott. So in the meantime, when they cannot be transitioned or will not transition, you're saying we're not going to provide basic services to them such as sanitation and sewage. That's a public safety issue as well. And we've had this discussion last year, even closing the Darren North camp about this. Is that acceptable in your mind to say, well, we don't want to enable this, but we're also creating other conditions that could be rectified, mitigated in the meantime? We aren't really addressing that issue.
So if I can restate your question, it was if someone will not go into housing, does the city have a responsibility to provide safe sanitary
Not
questions?
will not, but cannot.
I think you said
There
cannot or
there
will
are
not.
barriers. There are legitimate barriers that prevent people, like y'all were talking about.
So I'll go back to the conditions that we would enable someone to stay in that condition. So our focus would be, if you have some individual who needs any circumstance that you're describing, then bring them forward. Let us get them into a case management program, find out what kind of shelter program. There are green bins that get it dumped at some sites, particularly there, but we don't encourage, the unsanitary conditions in which all of that stuff would lead to. I mean, so we can do some, but again, there's the philosophy. Do we want to encourage those conditions, or do we want to take them one by one, hold their hand, and move them into something more sustainable?
I think I saw a hand up over here. Yes, sir.
I know all these things are expensive, and sometimes the best way to prevent the expense is to prevent it in the first place. Now, I've had some experience interviewing a lot of people in lower income and people without jobs, and two things absolutely appalled me. Number one, they're ignorant of job opportunities that are open to them. Going over to the state employment agency is a very sterile experience. And I personally have helped a couple of men that were making minimum wage, and they did not know that they could get training to get jobs that were making 5, 6 times that much. Drake State University, Calhoun. You can go over there in 12 to 18 months, you can graduate, and there are employers waiting to hire these people. So when I would tell them these things, they looked at me like, you must be lying, but I'm not. And how can we get that word out there, get them to understand they do not need a college degree? And the second thing is, and it's controversial, but a lot of these women came in that have 3, 4 children. If anyone tell them, they could probably prevent getting into that mess in the first place.
So can you address barriers and how you help people transition? That's part of the case management, is helping people exit homelessness.
That's exactly right, Jenny. So that's part of what when I'm out there with the caseworkers doing is trying to educate and provide additional information on this is what, so there is a sheet at the front where it had resources. And this is just a few of the agencies that we work with and partner with that provide assistance and case management, addiction recovery services, but that is what I do. If a barrier is not having, ask them, do you have a job? Is that something that you're working towards? And if you can't get a job because you don't have an ID, well, let's get an ID first. And then let's get you connected with this caseworker. We are working with people who are employing, or trying to hire people all the time. It's a work and shelter, organization that's, outside maybe the city limits. We're trying to make sure they're connected with the different resources and programs that are available to them. You don't have to have a college education. If you need some place to live, and they will do job training, and they will do education, they'll provide education for you during this time also. So that's what I work with the agencies in the camps directly to try to maybe enlighten some misconceptions that they may have, where we can work as a multidisciplinary team and maybe provide, there's actually solutions out there. It's not always just roadblocks. Let's get through those barriers and, get through those hurdles and, find the next solution. So that's what we're out there doing.
I'll share one quick example with you. The Home Builders Association has their North Alabama Home Builders Academy. It's an 8-week program. Anybody can go in fact, high school kids can go in and learn in 8 weeks what they need to know to work on the job site. And then contractors will hold hiring fairs and hire them. A young man was referred from First Stop. He was living in Derrick, he was at Derrick South. And was referred by First Stop, went to the Home Builders Academy, was able to get a job working with a home builder on a construction crew, was able to afford an apartment, and is now successfully living in that apartment. So it's possible. It's possible for that to happen, but the individual needs to be willing to make that change. And if they have a mental illness, if they've got substance abuse, it's much harder to make that change. vouchers, so that needs to be addressed. So that's what this team is doing. They are working together to identify what, and one-on-one, what are those individual barriers and how can we help you exit homelessness?
Where's the home builders academy?
It's off of Tran. If you go to the Home Builders Association, they can tell you about the academy. Great program. Yes, sir.
So I'm under the impression that from the federal level, like top down from HUD, that they're really pushing forward on the Housing First initiative. So what actions would the city want to take in order to ensure that funding, or otherwise, what will the city do to supplement if that funding is removed if HUD isn't happy with the city not going down the Housing First initiative?
Many communities are having the same struggles with Housing First. Housing First is a model that is most effective when you have housing placements to put people. One of the barriers that we run into, which is not an anomaly, and so to say that HUD would be displeased, there's no evidence that we're not attempting to utilize Housing First. But without sounding facetious, we have to have Housing First to put them into. And so when we have landlords who have rental units where the description begins before you even state how many bedrooms and bath they are, no emergency housing vouchers, no Section 8 assistance accepted, many barriers are being placed to the ability to embrace Housing First. Housing First suggests as a model that individuals do not have to earn the right to be placed directly into a unit. But the issues and barriers that we run into is identifying units with landlords who are willing to look beyond the stigma associated with the need for affordable housing. Everyone who needs affordable housing is not going to tear up your unit. And they're not going to tear it up any more than individuals that are making good money that are just trifling. I'm sorry, I'm going to call it for what it is. So at the end of the day, it's the ability to advocate for more individuals with units and properties to say, we're willing to take a chance on that. We had more emergency housing vouchers issued in Madison County than any other housing authority throughout the state, 110 vouchers. And yet, we added those vouchers to the number of housing choice vouchers, the program formerly known as Section 8. We already had 300 plus individuals that the housing authority had issued vouchers to that cannot find a landlord that would be willing to rent to them.
Just to follow on, shouldn't it be the city's responsibility to ensure that those housing options are there in the first place? And if so, then why is only 7% of the housing and new construction in the Huntsville Development Report affordable housing units?
Sure. So the ability to mandate that individuals who are building designate so many units extends far beyond community development's capacity. When you say the city, it's such a broad, overarching reach. The only thing that we're prepared really to speak to is what community development is able to do. But when it comes to the ability to make that mandate, you'd be surprised. Some developers, there are some who would be willing to abort the project before they allow that to happen. And if that's the case, I hear you saying, yeah, well, so be it. But when you think of the city's responsibility to take into consideration the needs of all residents, when you look at our numbers for the point in time count, most recently HUD did some unprecedented designation of funding specifically for communities with unsheltered homeless issues. We were nowhere near the number to be able to really actively pursue that funding. That does not mean that we don't have a homelessness issue, but it means that in some aspects our hands are kind of tied with the ability to, people say things like build a housing first complex. You don't concentrate poverty like that. If anything, there should be mixed-use options. From a planning perspective, you want to spread out. Concentrating poverty, we've seen that for decades in other communities where it did not work and they end up having to tear down those structures because they go downhill very rapidly.
Another question, yes, ma'am.
What's the responsibility of the individual who gets subsidized housing? Are they required to work? What is their responsibility to pay back to the city?
We aren't specifically subsidizing any housing, but a lot of the largest subsidy is coming through the housing authority.
I understand you're subsidizing it.
The question
If
is,
I
what's
get
the responsibility
subsidized
of
housing, I should have a responsibility to the person that's giving me that subsidy. So am I supposed to work and pay a portion, or am I supposed to go to school and educate myself so I can work?
It depends on your capability.
What though? What stipulations do you give that person?
It depends on their capability. If they are receiving disability income, then the stipulations that you can place upon them are minimal. But if they are individuals who are receiving like voucher assistance, they are required to do different classes on a holistic approach to health. So financial empowerment. If there's a daycare kind of issue, let's look at that and let's get them a skill set to get to the next level. Again, these type of programs are primarily coming through the housing authority, which is not the city.
Well, how long can they be on subsidized housing?
There are generations that have been raised on Section 8 and Housing Choice Child Vouchers programs, but those are programs, again, where individuals who are doing the best that they can based on their ability are required to give back, and others, that's our kind of responsibility to take care of.
We have time for one more, sorry to cut you up.
Doesn't that tell you that you're encouraging it?
And dealing with generational poverty is a whole other issue that we need to address at another time.
Well, we sure do.
Al, would you like to ask our last question?
Yeah, I'm looking at these point and count and time count numbers, and on the sheet here is 318 sheltered homeless, 231 unsheltered, 925 beds available. So to me, it sounds like anybody that wants one can get a bed. Is that correct, or?
So can you address the difference between the point in time count of sheltered and unsheltered individuals and the number of beds that are available?
Sure. At some of the entities that are supplying the beds, there are regulations and stipulations where individuals are not able to occupy the shelter. So it depends. Some of it is a criminal background issue. Others is the household composition. You have some families that do not want to be split up. At one of our larger facilities, if you have a male child over the age of 12, that child is expected to go to the adult male side, while as a mother, that wouldn't happen. So there are some barriers. When you look at those numbers, some of that is personal choice not to occupy the bed, and others, there are definite barriers.